Welcome to the Lions Pulse, a YouTube channel where we're here to talk all the latest news, rumors, and everything else you can think about when it comes to the Detroit Lions. I'm your boy Meko, and first and foremost, I want to say thank you to everybody that's here that took out the time to join this live stream. I really do appreciate you guys taking the time to just kind of come and kick it with me. But before I even get too far into this stream, one thing that I would really appreciate from you guys, if you guys wouldn't mind, is definitely hitting that like button, hitting that subscribe button if you haven't, if you are new to this channel. This channel is brand new, so any type of love that you can show to the channel will be greatly appreciated as we kind of get on the road to building this new channel that is going to be strictly built around talking about the Detroit Lions. Also, jump into the chat. I would definitely love to know who's hanging out with me tonight. Would love to be able to engage with you. Feel free to share your thoughts in the chat. Whether you agree, whether you disagree, whether you think I'm just making stuff up, whatever it might be. I always enjoy the dialogue and being able to go back and forth with people on what I'm kind of seeing and what I'm more or less what I'm just talking about. D Williams, I see you in the chat. What's good with you? Um, and so, yeah, really appreciate you guys taking out the time, but I'm not going to hold you guys long. The stream is kind of going to go pretty seamlessly. I know you guys got things to do. I'm not trying to be on here for 3-4 hours, but there are plenty of things that we got to talk about, and I want to really dive into it tonight. The first thing that we're going to start off with is talking about some news that last week in regards to the Detroit Lions starting quarterback. Dave Burkett wrote an article as well as it was on 97 on the ticket where Brad Holmes went on there and kind of dropped this bombshell on the fan base in regards to the Lions being in talks with Jared Goff about a contract extension. And I don't know about everybody else, but for me, like, this was a little bit shocking coming on the heels of the NFL draft, where we just saw the Lions take a quarterback, relatively high and when you're considering the third round and what you're kind of looking for in a third round quarterback, but not just the fact that you've picked a third round quarterback, you picked someone in Hendon Hooker, who by a lot of people's measure could be like a future starting quarterback in this league. So when you take a guy like that and then you turn around and you're talking about like, yeah, we're in talks, we're talking to Jared's agent about a contract extension, for me, it kind of threw me for a loop. And it was kind of like, it kind of hit the brakes on a lot of the Hendon Hooker talk, because it's like, well, maybe they're not looking to move on from Jared as soon as I thought they were. Um, Shout out to Boo M saying, yo, you scared me, thought they extended Jared Goff. No, they did not extend him just yet. But I mean, again, like I said, the news dropped last week that they are potentially looking at extending him, right? They're in talks on an extension. And um, I don't really know how I feel about that. On one hand, I guess I want to unpack this from like every level I possibly can. On one hand, I can understand why, from Jared's camp or even from the Lions' standpoint, they may want to look at extending Jared, because when you look at Jared Goff's contract, Jared Goff is in a very team-friendly contract. He is only going to be costing the Detroit Lions about 31 million, like just under 31 million this year for 2023, and then next year it bumps up a little bit to 32 million. And when you look at Goff's contract, he's literally like basically in the middle when you're considering starting level quarterbacks. He has about the 14th highest, contract. So he's getting paid less than Kirk Cousins. He's getting paid less than Matt Stafford. He's getting paid less than Derek Carr, and he's getting paid less than Dak Prescott. And those are quarterbacks that I think when you sit there and you talk to fans and you hear those names, probably except for Matt Stafford because he has the most recent Super Bowl, everybody's going to sit there and say Jared Goff is probably better. They're going to argue about Jared Goff being better than Kirk Cousins, Derek Carr, or Dak Prescott. And I think there's a argument to be made if you're talking about talent. I will say, though, from my own standpoint, and this is not me being a hater of Jared Goff, but I can sit here and say, yeah, but those other quarterbacks have been to the postseason more recently than Jared Goff. Whether you say, Kirk Cousins played on a Vikings team that was fraudulent, whether you could say Dak Prescott, obviously he had a very bad year the year before. There's still enough there to say like, well, I mean, these guys have kind of done things prior to, them getting contract extensions to kind of justify that. Derek Carr is probably the biggest outlier in that, because again, him signing a contract with the New Orleans Saints in free agency this year, obviously they paid a premium to basically what they felt like secure a better quality quarterback than what they've had the last few years. So in that sense, okay, Jared's getting paid less than those guys, and he's only getting paid more than the likes of Ryan Tannehill, Geno Smith, and Jimmy Garoppolo. And again, those are guys that I think a lot of people would agree that, like, yo, Jared is better than those guys. But again, I guess when I take off my Honolulu blue glasses and I take a step back and I kind of look at everything, I feel like Jared's being compensated fairly well for the type of quarterback that he is. When you're talking about a guy making $31 million, yes, that is low by the upper echelon of quarterbacks that are getting paid 40 million plus. But I think when you look at those quarterbacks that are 40 million plus, you start to kind of see that there is a huge disparage in talent. Um, I don't think Jared Goff is the type of quarterback that can truly go head to head with a Josh Allen, a Patrick Mahomes, guys like Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts who just got paid recently. There seems to be a gap between Jared's talent and what these guys are able to do. These guys are able to elevate teams literally solo. We saw Lamar Jackson do it for a number of years, be this type of quarterback that always had the Ravens in contention despite not having high quality receivers around him. You look at the likes of Jalen Hurts, though, and you see someone that's like, okay, they surrounded him with a lot of pieces, and Jalen Hurts rose to the occasion by not just like having a good season, but like having the type of season that took his team to the Super Bowl and being in an MVP conversation. So when we kind of rewind back to this whole conversation of like, okay, so does Jared deserve a contract extension? It's possible if you're just simply saying like, hey, what he did last year is deserving of a pay raise. Maybe. But then we have to have this deeper conversation of like, okay, well, then how far are you trying to extend him? Because I think once you go by like beyond a year, maybe even 2 years, like you're getting into very dangerous territory because again, we have to look back at Hendon Hooker and say, so you're literally just telling us that Hendon Hooker has to sit for what 2, 3, 4, or 5 years? Like, well, then at that point in time, what did you waste the third round pick for if this is a guy who's already 25 years old and you're not going to give him a legitimate shot to start? Now, I say all this to say this. If Jared goes out this year and balls out and takes the Lions to the playoffs, takes them to the Super Bowl, then I think we can again revisit this conversation. And I think he's much more deserving of a contract extension because of the work that he's done in that season. So far, what we do know about Jared Goff is that he has had a bad season in his first year in Detroit, and he had a very good season this past season where he threw for, over 4,000 yards, just under 30 touchdowns, and I think he only had about 7 interceptions and a completion percentage of about 65%. So like he's he's done enough to where you may feel confident, but I don't think he's done enough to justify again a long-term commitment. And I feel like if the Lions actually felt that he was deserving of that, again, I don't think you draft Hendon Hooker in the third round. No matter how talented you think Hendon Hooker is, why would you waste a third round pick on a quarterback that you don't plan on starting in a year or two? And so my hope is that if there are contract extension talks going on with Jared, it's like a 1 year extension just to get him more money this year. Maybe just to get him some guaranteed money in the event that he gets injured. Because again, the Lions are in a very comfortable situation, not only with his contract, but with the dead money hit that they would take next year if they decide to cut him. Um, I don't understand it or really be able to comprehend why they would jeopardize that. Um, in a situation where again you're seeing that a lot of teams, a lot of these younger teams, the Bengals and teams that have these younger quarterbacks are much closer to being on the rise because they have the ability to build teams without having to worry about these large contracts kind of looming around them. Shout out to my guy Luke in the chat saying, yo, so happy to see you up and running. Appreciate you, Luke. Quick little just like behind the scenes thing. Luke has been a huge help to me, just again giving advice, being a real solid friend, somebody who else is in the content world, putting out really good Lions content. So if you're not following Luke, I suggest that you do. I ain't gonna lie to you, he gonna ruffle your feathers, but it's in a good way. He has a great following, he has a great fan base. So definitely check out Luke G's YouTube channel for sure. Luke also said, but in my opinion, we need to move on from Goff. However, if they're willing to extend on a 1 year, which is the same thing I'm saying, sure. But even that's kind of dumb. I agree. with you, Luke. Like again, I can get with a 1 year extension, but 1 year is even that is pushing Hendon Hooker out even further. And again, it kind of draws me back to wondering, okay, then what was the point in signing Hendon in the first place or drafting Hendon in the first place when you could have used that third round pick to address your defense, to get another wide receiver? Like you could have done a number of other things other than draft a quarterback that you're essentially telling us that you're going to sit for again 3 to 4 years. Um, Again, appreciate all of you guys in the chat. Big T, um, with the what up though, just subbed. Appreciate you, man. Appreciate you coming by. Appreciate you showing some love. Um, but yeah, let me know what you guys think in the comment section about the whole idea about Jared Goff being extended. If are you on board with it, or is it something that you kind of are just like you would accept it if it happened, but it's not something that you're really, looking for. Um, Big T says, do not, no, don't extend him. Let him play the season out. Again, I agree. Jared Goff, again, when you look at his resume, has he had like spectacular seasons? Absolutely. And I'm not even sitting here saying that he's not going to have a good season this year. I'm saying let that play out. Let him show you that he can have consistent, like that he can have 2 consistent years in a row, right? He was very productive this past year. Show me that you can do it again. And he's going to kind of have to do it again in similar situation where he's not going to have one of his wide receivers because James was going to be sitting out that 6 game suspension. He's going to have to, get acclimated to Jahmyr Gibbs. There's a lot of things from an offensive standpoint that we have to see that Jared can do so that he's able to again show that he's worthy of making 40 million. Like we're talking just $40 million a year. Like that's a lot of money to put him up again with the likes of Matthew Stafford, who's making 40 million. But Matthew can sit there and say, hey, I won a Super Bowl before I got paid, or I got paid and then I took us to a Super Bowl. Like it kind of went hand in hand. And again, you can sit here and argue and say, well, Kirk Cousins is basically a carbon copy of Jared Goff. And I will sit here and say, yeah, but Kirk Cousins takes his team to the playoffs. Doesn't mean he's great, but he does something that Jared Goff has to do in order to justify making, again, closer to $40 million a year. Same with Dak. Dak has taken his team to the playoffs. Now, they haven't gone anywhere, but you have to at least show that you're worth that investment. And one thing that Jared does have going for him in the likes of Kirk Cousins, Matthew Stafford, and Derek Carr is that he is younger. So again, I could understand it from a Lions perspective of how they'd be like, well, he's younger. There's still more room for him to grow. And so maybe we make this investment now and then therefore it'll pay off in a couple years. I just think it's a gamble that I'm not really comfortable with the Lions taking. Um, this early in their kind of like again they're just now kind of getting their legs under them. They're getting a lot of like attention, they're getting a lot of love, they're being considered a contender, or I mean in some circles a favorite to win the NFC North. Why jeopardize that by again why jeopardize your future by giving a huge extension to a quarterback that again he's not a top 5 quarterback in this league. And so I can't justify giving top 5 money to a guy who hasn't accomplished some of the same things that some of the top 5 quarterbacks have, or again, just taking your team to another level to justify that huge payday. Now, kind of going on to the next thing that kind of plays off of this with Jared Goff and this whole idea of giving him an extension. Brad Holmes also talked about again that they added, they did add Hendon Hooker. They do have Nate Sudfeld, but he did mention in an interview um, that they're still looking to add another backup quarterback to this quarterback room. And I think for a lot of us, we kind of go back to those reports that we heard earlier before the draft about how the Lions made a very competitive offer for Teddy Bridgewater. And for me, I'm kind of conflicted on this one as well because Teddy Bridgewater would provide a certain level of comfort that I definitely don't have in Nate Sudfeld. And it's nothing against Nate Sudfeld, but when you haven't started a game and when there's going to be so much riding on the Lions to be successful on the shoulders of Jared Goff, I would like to have something that's a little more proven and being able to carry this team into the postseason in the event that something were to happen to Jared. And I think when it comes to someone like Teddy Bridgewater, I'm not sure what it would cost the Lions. I know the Lions have like roughly $20 million left in cap space. So they do have the funds to go out and make a very competitive offer to a Teddy Bridgewater. Especially again, going back to Hendon Hooker, Brad Holmes has been fairly adamant that they don't want to start him early, that they are willing to kind of play this out, let him get healthy, let him learn the system. and not put any type of additional pressure for him to come in and quote unquote lead a team. And if that's what they want to do, that's fine. We clearly saw them do that last year with JMO. They didn't rush JMO back from his injury. They just let him kind of heal up. And when he was ready to go, they threw him out there and he had his handful of plays and so forth. If that's the approach that they want to take with Hendon Hooker, I'm fine with it. And I think in that case, it's almost like you don't even have three quarterbacks on the roster. You have two. You still only have Jared Goff and you still only have Nate Sudfeld. So why not go out and get a third quarterback that could actually compete, that could actually um, step in a situation where if Jared Goff got hurt, that he can actually go out there and win you a game or two, um, because he's got that experience. And again, Hendon or not Hendon Hooker, Teddy Bridgewater to me represents that. The Lions kind of slow played this for whatever reason. Brad Holmes said earlier in the offseason that like, hey, they had a short list of guys, and there was a short list of guys, and Nate Sudfeld was on that list, and the other two guys, like, that it just didn't work out. Well, I've always been of the belief that Teddy Bridgewater was one of those guys, but Teddy Bridgewater, probably like a lot of these, backup quarterbacks, had a number in mind. They had something that they wanted to, they had some sort of compensation that they wanted to receive. And we saw how the Lions handled the Jamal Williams situation, where like, hey, they have a certain number in their head of like, this is how much money we're willing to pay for a specific position. And I think that this is where we probably saw the Lions and whatever backup quarterbacks they were talking with just not, being on the same page as far as what type of compensation is justifiable for a backup quarterback. Well, I think now that things have kind of like settled down, Teddy Bridgewater has probably talked to enough teams and he probably has a better understanding of what his market is. Probably came back to Detroit and was like, okay, let's like start this conversation back up. And like Big T says, I too would sign Teddy over Nate. I would feel more comfortable having Teddy over Nate just because, again, Teddy Bridgewater has that familiarity of being a starter. And, again, the offense is set up in such a way where Teddy's able to do the same thing that Jared Goff is basically able to do, which is operate the offense well without having this pressure to win the games by the strength of his own arm. He can go out there and have a solid running game. He can have a top tier offensive line. He has an Amon-Ra St. Brown and other weapons that can, help him in the passing game. So again, it's not about him doing it all or being Superman for those couple of games that Jared could be out or something of that nature, but he's able to do just enough to keep this team afloat and keep their postseason hopes alive. So again, when I'm kind of like looking at, the available free agent like quarterbacks, I think Teddy is probably the only one that really kind of stands out. I'm not interested in Carson Wentz. I think Carson Wentz has kind of ran himself out of the league, right? He's tried and he's gone to so many different places where I think we have gotten to the point where we understand what Carson Wentz is. Now, maybe down the line he can find himself in a Geno Smith situation, sure. But again, if we're talking about what you're willing to invest, Carson Wentz isn't it for me. Geno has been a backup. He's been comfortable being a backup, and he's capable of winning games. I think the only knock on Geno or on a Teddy that I would be a little concerned about is that like last year he did struggle with a lot of injuries, um, had some concussion issues. But again, you're talking about an offensive line that does a really good job of protecting their quarterbacks, which is probably why, like, again, the Lions probably haven't prioritized getting a good backup, but it's still like in a season where, again, so much is on the line, where there's so many high expectations for this team to be able to go far in the postseason. I would want to hedge my bets by having a solid backup that I know can win games and not just take a gamble on a Nate Sudfeld because, hey, he's great in meetings and he's great in practice. Like, that's all well and good. That's awesome that he's able to be a great sounding board for Jared and whatnot. I need to know that I have a guy that can go in there and throw the rock around and actually generate points and actually move the offense up and down the field. And again, we've seen Teddy Bridgewater do that. Um, and again, he's somebody that seems very comfortable with having that mindset of like, okay, I'm the backup. I'm here to do a job, and like we'll go out and do it. Going back to Carson Wentz, I think Carson Wentz is still trying to prove himself as a starting quarterback. Um, and for some quarterbacks, it's hard to do that, especially when you're a high draft pick. We see that with Carson Wentz. I think we see that with Cam Newton. Cams can't seem to let go of the fact that, like, hey, you're no longer the Cam Newton that we all thought you would be. And so he's constantly going back and forth, through the media about how good he should be or whether or not he should be on a roster. So instead of, again, wasting your time with that, go for a guy that's, again, proven. You have chemistry with him. He knows Dan. He knows Aaron Glenn. He has an understanding of what this culture will be, and he will go in there and at least be well prepared. Again, to go out there and start a game whenever called upon. So I don't know. That's my thoughts on the whole, again, backup quarterback situation, whether they should go out and target Teddy Bridgewater. I do think it's something that they should definitely be on the phone about if they really are. If they're not happy with the current quarterback situation, I would rather them do that. I know they signed a UDFA, Adrian Martinez out of Kansas State. I'm pretty sure Adrian Martinez also played at Nebraska. And if it's what I remember when he was at Nebraska, I'm not interested at all. Adrian Martinez was not a good quarterback in college from what I remember. And so it's not somebody, again, that I'm not willing to just be like, oh yeah, we can just throw that away. Like, I think that's the other thing too. I think Brad and Dan need to have learned their lesson from the Tim Boyle and David Blau experiment, where it's like, oh, like we can make them better. Like, they're backup quarterbacks for a reason. And so your backup quarterback needs to either be able to like play or not play. And I feel like it's fairly cut and dry in the NFL where you can tell, like, oh no, that guy can come in and maybe win a game or two, and that guy's going to go out there and probably just he's going to lose us a game. Like, he's going to throw pick sixes. He's not going to function well in the offense because the moment's just too big for him. And I think that's the situation we found ourselves in uh, with David Blau and Tim Boyle back when we were trying to keep them on the roster. Shout out to Luke. Luke saying, I will sign anyone over Nate. Listen, I wasn't a huge fan when they signed Nate. I didn't understand. Because Nate Sudfeld was like a last minute signing when we got him. Like, we cut our two backup quarterbacks, and then there was like, Nate Sudfeld's, played football before. Let's go with him. I'm not rocking with it. I'm not cool with just going out here and adding guys just for the sake of adding them. Um, D. Williams in the chat saying Adrian Martinez will be a practice squad quarterback that will give them athletic quarterback looks, and that's fine. Again, that's a designated role for, again, specifically the practice squad. So you have no intention of hopefully ever calling him up, but if you can have somebody that can actually run those looks so that your defense can be better prepared for these mobile quarterbacks that are taking over the league, I'm all for it. Like, that's cool. But you still need a third guy to be on the roster, especially if you're not expecting Hendon to contribute, if you're not expecting Hendon to be healthy. Because I think I read somewhere that like Hendon Hooker's ACL injury happened like either a week or a month before JMO. So like they're roughly on the same timetable to be healthy. And if that's the case, like we're not talking about seeing Hendon Hooker even being, possible to play until what, week 10, week 11. Um, and that's not something that, like, again, I would love to see Hendon play if that was a situation. Like, I've already kind of said in some circles that, hey, I expect to see Hendon Hooker play week 18 of this NFL season, because I feel like the Lions will have the division locked up and they'll just be like, hey, let's go see what Hendon has and let's keep Jarrett's fresh for the playoffs. And that'll be like the most exciting day, for me as a Lions fan, because I think that'll be our first glimpse of what life without Jared Goff could look like. In a game where it could still somewhat matter, in the sense of like whoever they're playing could be very similar to when we played Green Bay last year, where like, hey, just because that team may not be going to the playoffs and we are, they may still play hard. So you still get to get a pretty good evaluation of Hendon Hooker in a real live NFL game. Luke, so this is funny with Luke. So if anybody who doesn't know Luke is very big on like, hey, if you draft certain players, like, yo, let them, like, he wants to see them. Hendon Hooker is somebody he doesn't want to see at all. And I disagree. I would love to see him. I'm not saying you need to see him, but I would love to see him in a situation where, again, the division's wrapped up and you can kind of, again, just kind of have him out there and being like, hey, let's see what he has and let's see what our future kind of looks like. So yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the backup quarterback situation. Another thing that I kind of really wanted to get into. So the draft was a couple weeks ago at this point, and one of the things that I brought up a couple years ago that I'm hearing more people talk about this year is Brad Holmes and his love for his quote unquote guys, right? The guys that he deems as, hey, these are Lions players. These are guys that we need to have in our building because they fit our culture. And I feel like the first year it was great. It was great to hear this idea of like, hey, we're trying to establish a culture. We want guys that fit us. We want guys that have that same mentality. That was awesome because I feel like the Lions haven't had that for so many years now. And so it was awesome to have a coach and GM tandem that was committed to like, hey, we're not just going out here just throwing money around. We're actually going to find guys that fit the city and they're going to be committed to our style of football and they're going to be committed to our style of winning. Where I started to get concerned was the second draft, and I started looking at some of the guys they picked, and it was specifically at the top, right? Is when I first started raising this concern. And I did have to eat like a little bit of crow on it, but it was the idea of like, okay, they're going to pick Aiden Hutchinson. And the number one reason I was hearing coming out of people's mouths before we talked about his talent was he's a culture fit. And it's like, that's great, but I would rather him be like a stellar player. Like I'm all for us having guys that fit the culture that are, that are clean, they're not going to get in trouble and all that type of stuff. But at the same time, and I feel like some of you guys may agree with me, you also want dogs. You also want guys that can go out on the field and perform at a high level. And so again, I did have to eat a little bit of crow because Aiden went out and he played well. He didn't play well for the entire season, but near that back end of the season, he really started to put it together and be way more consistent week in and week out. Um, and you kind of saw that again, even with other guys like James Houston being a late round pick that a lot of people were scratching their head about out of Jackson State. And then once he finally got his opportunity, it was like, oh, we see why you drafted this guy. And we were able to see that the sack numbers that he was able to put together at Jackson State actually translated over to the NFL. His preparation and the way that he attacked the game translated to the NFL. And then there's other guys that you look at. Malcolm Rodriguez obviously stepped up in a big way, and was able to take a linebacker spot that, again, weak linebacker class, but he still took it from veterans. He still took it from guys that should have known how to pick up this defense and execute it at a higher level than he was as a rookie. And so you were able to get impact from a player like that as well. Kirby Joseph had instant impact on the back end once Tracy Walker went down. And so there's this. So in some senses, it's like, okay, Brad has proven himself right that like, okay, he goes out, he gets his guys, and his guys have so far paid off. But I think this was the draft where a lot of people are starting to kind of come around to what I was saying last year, which is, are we sure that it's okay for Brad to be falling so much in love with the guys that he's picking? Because we finally saw it happen in a way that I don't think a lot of people loved when it happened. You see him take a Jahmyr Gibbs at 12 after trading down from 6, picking a Jahmyr Gibbs at 12 and bypassing a Bijan Robinson when he could have got Bijan. You see Brad Holmes stay at 18, and when he has the opportunity to take another defensive player or whatever player you were screaming for at that moment, he goes out and he takes Jack Campbell. And I think that was when people were finally like, hey, and I think we all kind of knew what Brad was going to say when he got to the podium. Hey, these are our guys. They fit our culture. We love them. You know the whole spiel at this point. And that's kind of what I knew Brad would say. And I was half in, half out with him because the guys that they picked, I love too. Much like many of you guys running mock drafts, trying to figure out who's going to be available when, who would I pick up where. Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell were guys that I would occasionally be routinely picking in the second round because they were there. And if they were there at 48, cool, I'm taking Jahmyr Gibbs. If Jack Campbell's there at 55 and I really want to get a linebacker, I'm probably taking Jack Campbell. And so they were guys that I was a big fan of because of, again, not only did I think they had great ability, but they were guys that I also kind of felt like, oh yeah, they fit the culture. But again, you're getting great value getting them in the second. Well, Brad just took that up to another level by taking the guys that I like, but taking them in a round much earlier than I would have taken them. And so now I think everyone is sitting back and they're starting to question, like, okay, it's cool that they love guys. It's cool that they identify guys that are culture fits, but is this process is it too easy? I think another example of this is Devin Witherspoon. We, again, for most of the draft process, heard that Devin Witherspoon would be a perfect fit for the Lions. Why? Because he was a culture fit and this, that, and the other. And it's becoming a point where I'm starting to question if, like, if it's too easy to spot the Lions type. Like some of y'all might have that friend where like you just know what he likes. So you know not to even take him certain places because if you take him there, like the girls that he likes are going to be there and he's not going to be able to contain himself and he's going to go act a fool. Brad Holmes is starting to feel like that guy where it's like, I can probably go through a draft class and it's like, all right, let me find a guy that has extreme grit and that just seems like he's a madman on the football field and just seems like he loves football. Well, that's probably going to be a Brad Holmes, Dan Campbell type of guy. And now you have to start wondering, okay, are they going to take them where these draft experts are saying that they're going to be, or are they going to get too excited and jump the gun and take them early? Another example of this, again, of Brad falling in love with a guy and almost jumping the gun a little too early is when they were drafting Levi Onwuzurike. And the rumor and the news came out that, like, yo, he wanted to take Levi at the end of the first. And we can we all know how that's all played out with Levi so far, and that he's not really been able to get on the field. He hasn't really been able to stay healthy, which is not no fault of his own. Obviously, he's not out here breaking his body on his own. But again, you kind of look back at that and be like, man, he was so in love with this guy that he was open to the idea of trading up for them, was willing to kind of give it all up just to get him. Luke says he was going to trade up for Sewell, right? Like that's another guy. Now there was also talk that I also remember hearing that Micah Parsons, I believe, was on the podcast The Pivot and had told Ryan Clark and those guys that like, hey, the Lions had told him that they would take him if he was there, and if with the idea that Penei Sewell had been picked, they would probably take Micah Parsons, and I think that would have been great. Again, that probably would have been like an amazing pick to me because like I don't know if Micah Parsons necessarily screamed, Lions fit at that time when he was being drafted because he had some of those issues from Penn State that were kind of being attached to him. I don't know if he necessarily screamed like, hey, Detroit Lions fit. But again, like Luke is kind of saying it in the chat, Dorsey stopped him. The one thing I guess I can kind of give Brad Holmes credit for is that he surrounded himself with people that check him, that keep him in check and that keep him accountable so that he doesn't make these goofball decisions and go up too high or jump the gun too early and get guys that aren't worth it, but like, hey, they'll be there. Like you have to trust the process and trust that they'll be there. And I think we saw that in last year's draft. I think there were a number of moments where I think Brad even came out and said there were moments where he wanted to jump up, but it was like, hey, we have to trust that this person will be here. And it's paid off. It's paid off, I think, in the form of Kirby Joseph. I believe it's paid off in the form of Amon-Ra St. Brown, where again, you're not getting overly aggressive and you're trusting the fact, like, trust your draft board. I think that it's like the thing that I'm kind of coming back to with Brad Holmes, where it's like, I would love for him to trust his draft board more and not go so much off of emotion. I think the one time that really showed up the worst in this past draft is the Broderick Martin pick, and giving up so many day 3 picks to go up and get Broderick Martin, where I think you really could have waited. I think you really could have waited another round to see if there had been like a big wave of defensive tackles and then be like, all right, let's go out here and like maybe trade up in the 4th to get him. But to jump all the way back up into the 3rd to take a guy that like I remember the draft day, like not a lot of people even had tape on Broderick Martin. People were like scrambling to figure out who this guy was. And I think we'll talk about it in a later stream. Like I do have positive feelings about Broderick Martin. I do think there's a role for Broderick Martin on this team. I just don't love the fact that Brad, again, going off of his love for a player, is assuming that everybody else in the league loves this player too. So therefore, I have to mortgage, I have to sell high on my assets just to make sure that I get the guy I love, instead of trusting the process and just being able to see like, hey, maybe this guy will be there. Luke says they're gonna cut that D tackle watch. He was not someone that was going to miss. I don't think Broderick Martin gets cut. I don't, because again, you took him in the 3rd round. He's going to be in there. And I do think he's the guy that Brad Holmes talked about, where he's like, yo, we played Isaiah Buggs way too much this past season. And you look at Broderick Martin, and Broderick Martin can do a lot of the things that I think they want Isaiah Buggs to do, which is stop the run, be stout in the middle. And there's just like all of this, like this entire draft class, and we'll get to it a little bit later in the podcast where I'm going to do some rookie comparisons. All of these guys have room to improve. No one is a finished product. And I think Broderick Martin has the physical makeup to where you'll be like, okay, we can take what he already has physically and turn him into a solid run defender. And I think the biggest thing with Broderick Martin is like he just has to get stronger at the point of attack. He has to become more stout in and being able to take the size that he has, being over 6'5" and over 300 pounds. Like, dude, you need to be able to manhandle people. You have to be able to be an anchor, but at the same time, like be able to take on double teams and chuck a dude. Like, you're too big to not be doing that. Um, Big T says he thinks B Martin is going to be on the practice squad. I mean, I don't think they have a like. This is the thing too. You also got to think they don't have another guy to do what Broderick Martin is potentially going to do as far as a run defender. Like they don't have run stuffers. I think if Levi can come back and be explosive, that'll be great. But again, I think he's still going to be very limited. He's going to be somebody that's going to rotate with a lean. I don't think they're like looking at Levi at this point to start. I think John Kaminsky is a guy that they look to rotate so that they can run their defensive line stunts with Kaminsky and Hutch, or Kaminsky and Houston, or Kaminsky and Pascal. Like he's their jack of all trades that like helps their defensive line be a little more dynamic and be a little more creative. But when you're talking about just being stout up front, you literally only have two guys, and those two guys, well, one of those two guys clearly has shown that he doesn't have the stamina to be out there for long snaps, which is typically the case for run defenders. So you need a guy that can also, you need another big body that you can throw in there. And that's kind of where I come in with Broderick Martin. All in all, I say that to say, like, again, I agree with some of you guys in the chat where it's like I said earlier, the whole idea of trading up for Broderick Martin, giving up so much because you love that guy and you think that you were going to miss out on him. I just think it was too early. I think it was way too early in the third round to assume that you were going to miss out on that guy. I believe the D tackle from Baylor was still available, and he was considered a stout run defender. Um, and so the fact that like you took a guy from Western Kentucky before him, again, I think there would have been plenty of time to evaluate, like, hey, do you think this guy from Western Kentucky is going to be here? Um, and so it's something that I think like Brad has kind of slipped into these last couple years, is like, again, they have their guys, they have their culture. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with having a culture. There's nothing wrong with saying, like, hey, we want guys to fit a certain mentality. That's great. That's going to keep your team going in the right direction for a long period of time. But I do kind of have a little bit of hesitancy, and I do like kind of get a little concerned. That's like, okay, are we going too far in this direction? Are we overlooking too many good players for the sake of culture? Right. Um, like I said, the guys that they picked in the first round maybe isn't who I picked, but I do love those players. So I'm not going to sit here and talk down about Jahmyr Gibbs or talk down about Jack Campbell. They're just not. They didn't pick them when I would have picked them. And then we can like, I mean, it would be kind of a moot conversation to go through like who I would have picked and things like of that nature, because I think there are other things that come into play other than just talent, especially when you look at a guy like Jalen Carter, right? It's not just talent that you have to equate for. You have to equate for his character and whether or not he's someone that you can trust, not just outside of the facility, but can you trust him to prepare? Can you trust him to give ultimate effort? And if those things become in question, then yeah, like I don't think you draft, guys like that. So I still think those things are important. But this was, again, I think this was the most blatant draft that we kind of had, where it really seems like there was a lopsided view in just overall talent versus versus how much these guys loved them, specifically how much Brad Holmes loved them. Um, BD Buster says, would you trade for Quinnen Williams? Do you want a big contract? Quinnen Williams would be really interesting. And I guess, yes, in a way, yeah, I would. I would love to trade for Quinnen Williams. And this is the reason why. It would definitely like kill the Jared Goff contract extensions talk that we had earlier in the show. I'm not a big fan of the idea of extending Jared Goff. So if you go out and you get a guy like Quinnen Williams, well, now you have big money tied up in a defensive tackle that will obviously help anchor your defense. And you can't afford to give your quarterback $40 million. So it makes that transition clearer and easier to Hendon Hooker, in my opinion, that you can now, again, have this young quarterback leading your offense, but then have a collection of veterans in your secondary, young talented edge rushers, and then like a proven monster in the middle in Quinnen Williams to kind of wreck shop in the NFC. So I don't know what it would cost you, but I think at this point in time, like the Lions, you kind of gotta strike while the iron is hot, in my opinion, with where the NFC is right now, where it's kind of like a one team race in one or two team race, really, when you look at Philly and San Francisco, where those two look like okay, those are the top two teams in the NFC. And then like again, depending on how positive you feel about the Lions, like yeah, the Lions slide in there at third. Um, at least they do for me. I don't know if I'm really concerned about anybody else in the NFC. Um, I guess we could always I mean, again, you could always throw in the Vikings. Maybe, they're fraudulent, but at the same time, like 13 wins is 13 wins. Um, and for me, that's kind of it. I mean, maybe New Orleans kind of bounces back with Derek Carr. Maybe Derek Carr, does bring some life to that team. The Cowboys are the Cowboys. I don't care. Like, I don't care what anybody says. The Cowboys gonna Cowboys every year. So they'll have all this hype in the offseason. They may win 10 games, they'll get bounced in the first round of the playoffs. Like it's not something I'm overly concerned about. Um Giants, maybe, right? They were obviously in the postseason last year. Brian Dable seems to have figured out the Danny Dime situation. So there's always a little bit of concern there. Again, when a quarterback starts playing above their means. Um, and again, when you start looking at the NFC North, not really concerned about the Packers. I think the Vikings are literally a coin toss. I don't like the fact that they added Jordan Addison in the draft to go along with Justin Jefferson. I think that's going to be a little more problematic than I think a lot of Lions fans have talked about, just because Justin Jefferson is a handful on his own, and Adam Thielen was getting up there in age, so you didn't really have to contend with him a whole lot. I think Jordan Addison is going to bring again some more youth and some more explosiveness to that offense. Um, Honestly, like my biggest fear is that he becomes like the Amon-Ra St. Brown to the Vikings, and that he like really operates in the slot and just kind of kills you over the middle. But I think we do have an answer for that, and I'll get to that in a minute when we talk about these rookie comparisons. Um, Big T says, wouldn't mind seeing Hendon Hooker in a wild card package at the end of the regular season. Again, I don't like. I think there's a lot that they could do with Hendon Hooker again, with just kind of easing him into the game. I mean, obviously you have the mobility aspect. He has a much more live arm than what Jared Goff has, and I do think this offense, like I was very bullish on Hendon Hooker in the draft process because I don't like the system that he ran in Tennessee. It's too quarterback friendly for me, where it's this one read, more reading one side of the field. You're not really going through progressions type of thing, and that's something he's absolutely going to have to do in the NFL. But you can't deny that when he sees it, he hits those throws, right? He's very like his mechanics are very good in that sense. Um, the thing is, you're gonna have to find out like can he process information quickly? How quickly can he go from his first read to his third, fourth, potentially fifth read? Can he make that progression? Can he go from one, two, three, and then run, or is he going to sit there and become a statue in the pocket and try to make throws um, that he probably just shouldn't make? The one thing I find interesting about Hendon Hooker is like that was a concern that a lot of people had about CJ Stroud, is that CJ Stroud didn't work through his progressions enough. I didn't hear enough people bring that up about Hendon Hooker, that he just doesn't work through a lot of progressions. And maybe it's because Tennessee wasn't out there rolling out, that many receivers at a time. So he only had like one or two reads to make before having to make a decision. Um, but I say that to say, like, I think Hendon Hooker in this offense with Ben Johnson, um, will one, keep it very easy and simple for him, but also give him that ability to make those same big plays that he was able to make at Tennessee. Um, but again, that's somebody that I do plan on doing. We're not going to do it in this stream. I want to work through the entire draft class and kind of do like which was kind of what we're going to move into next. Um, I want to do just like some Detroit Lions rookie comparisons. We're going to start with the two rookies that the Lions took in the first round. And I know that like a lot of draft experts have already done this. They've already said like, oh, and it's common, right? You have these new prospects that come in, and draft analysts get them, they break down their film, and they're saying, hey, this player reminds me of X. And the one problem that I have with that, it's always on the high side. It's always the ceiling that like, hey, this player can be this. And the reality is that player could be that, but that player could also have a floor that could be somebody else. And so what I wanted to do in prepping for this stream was like I wanted to look at a couple guys. I wanted to look at Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell first, and really just kind of, from my perspective, going through a couple games, trying to understand what I think their ceilings are and what I think their floors are, so that as a fan, you guys will kind of get to know this about me as I continue to stream. I try to be as realistic as I can be. I try not to get too high, try not to get too low. I try to stay as even keel as I can when watching my team. Um, but and in doing so, I'm aware that players have ceilings and players have floors. So how bad is the floor in some of these situations? And I'm hoping, like, again, let's make this a conversation. Feel free to disagree with me. I'm sure you guys will. But let's start with Jahmyr Gibbs. I apologize. I'm gonna upload clips of this later. And I'm gonna have a couple clips in there just of some quick highlights so you guys can kind of see what I'm talking about when I'm critiquing or something of that nature. Obviously this is a stream. I didn't want to kind of, first stream, didn't want to get this copywritten already or copyright claim put on it. But I will add those in shorter clips that I'm going to add to the channel later today, today and tomorrow. But yeah, let's start with Jahmyr Gibbs. My ceiling comparison for him is Christian McCaffrey and Jamal Charles. Now, I don't know if enough people are giving him this comparison. I know I've heard a lot of people say Alvin Kamara, and I get why they say Alvin Kamara, but I think he will have Alvin Kamara type usage. But when you look at his play style and what he actually does on the football field, it's much more similar to what Christian McCaffrey does and what Jamal Charles does. And when I say that, I would love for you guys to go back, look at how Christian McCaffrey runs, pull up some of his highlights, and do the same for Jamal Charles. And the fact that, like, they're not overly like shake and bake type of running backs. They're also not overly powerful running backs. They're not going to necessarily try to bowl over people, and they're not looking to, again, dance a lot when they hit a hole. They are very good running backs that have great vision and great explosion. And that is something that I see in Jahmyr Gibbs play in and play out. He is very good when he's able to see a hole and see a gap, and he hits that gap. And when he hits that gap, you can definitely chalk up like 6+ yards. Like, he's going to take that a very long ways, and he's going to, again, more on the Jamal Charles side of things, he's going to run away from guys. He has that gear to really take the top off of a defense, or to expose a defense if they're not accounting for their gaps properly. He has that home run hit ability. Again, in the sense of Christian McCaffrey, he has that do-it-all ability, where Christian McCaffrey is a great receiver. You can flex him out wide. You can send him in motion. You can run screens. You can do all of these different things with Christian McCaffrey. The same is true for Jahmyr Gibbs. He can run all of the same routes. You can have that type of flexibility to where your offense is a little more difficult to predict, because he can be in so many different places. But he's also good when catching the ball. So he can catch, make a cut, and pick up yards after the catch. Very similar to, again, Christian McCaffrey and Jamal Charles. Shout out to you, Big Teeth. Those are great comparisons. I appreciate it, man. Let's see if you feel that same way about his floor. Now, his floor is not going to make guys happy. If you were not a fan of taking Jahmyr Gibbs in the first, you are not going to like his floor at all when I looked at it. And Jahmyr Gibbs' floor to me is theoretic. And this is why. So for all of the good things that Jahmyr Gibbs does, there are some things that he does where you can see if he doesn't improve at them, he's going to get penciled into a very specific role, the same way Theo Riddick did when Theo Riddick was in Detroit. Theo Riddick obviously was a running back, and he was very good at catching the ball. But what he struggled at was actually like running in between the tackles, or being able to be productive as an actual runner of the football. So anytime they brought Theo Riddick into the game, it became very predictable. Like, okay, they're going to run some type of halfback option, halfback angle. Theo Riddick's more than likely going into the passing game. Because they're not going to hand it to him. They're not going to hand it to him in short down situations. They're not going to hand it to him on 3rd and 1, or anything like that, or on 1st and 10. Like, they're not handing him the ball. And while Jahmyr Gibbs gets a lot of touches, like, he got touches to be able to run, what you also saw is, like I said earlier, when he sees a hole, he bursts through a hole and he can pick up yards. What happens though is if there's not a hole, Jahmyr Gibbs has this tendency to press against the line and then he has nowhere to go. And so he tries to bounce. And then from that point on, like you're not getting anything out of him. He's getting probably a yard. He's if not losing yardage because he just doesn't have the strength or the ability to burst through tackles. Again, similar to Theo Riddick in that like Theo Riddick wasn't going to truck anybody. He wasn't going to shake anybody. It was he was going to get what he could get and then he was going to go down. And that's kind of what you see with Jahmyr Gibbs is that like he if he can't have an easy lane to pick up yardage, he becomes very easy to box in. He doesn't break a lot of tackles. Again, you watch watch some of his tape. I specifically watched the Texas game, the Tennessee game, the Arkansas game, and I believe the Auburn game. Oh, and the LSU game. He gets like he kind of gets hit a lot. First guy that usually touches him brings him down. It's not a lot of like powering through tackles. And that's I think that has more to do with his size. You know, he's 5'9", just under 200 pounds, so he's not this big, stocky back. So that's going to be a problem for him. What Jahmyr Gibbs is going to have to do so that he doesn't get penciled into a Theo Riddick type role is that he's going to have to be explosive um, in the run game more so than the pass game. Like we know what I'm very confident what Jahmyr Gibbs will do in the pass game. What I need for him to do is be dynamic in the run game. And again, to be more Christian McCaffrey, be more Jamal Charles, even be a little more Alvin Kamara, because Alvin Kamara came from a similar system where he, you know, it's a lot of shotgun, a lot of, you know, inside zone, outside zone type of runs. But when he got to the Saints, you saw him start to get put in more single back formations, and he started to become a better inside the tackles or in between the tackles type of runner, and to do those types of things. So this is not to say that Jahmyr Gibbs can't become those things, but how he currently played in Alabama would lean itself to like, hey, if he doesn't develop these skill sets, if he doesn't become a better between the tackles runner, if he doesn't become more dynamic in the run game, he's destined for a Theo Riddick type of role where like, hey, you're only going to get snaps on third down, and it's going like, and people are going to probably know that we're throwing it to you. Um, and again, I don't. That's not what you want when you're investing a first round pick and a running back that high. Um, with that said, let's move on to the Lions' second first round pick in Jack Campbell. Now, this is lofty, right? And I had to look at this one because I heard a couple people say, and I was like, that's really lofty when you look at what Luke Kuechly was for the Carolina Panthers. And it's not so much what Luke Kuechly was for the Carolina Panthers. You kind of have to go back to his Boston College tape. And when you go back to that tape and you look at what Luke Kuechly was doing, the one thing that Jack does amazing, and I was very impressed when going through his tape, looking at what he does very well, and that's dropping coverage. Jack is an amazing zone coverage linebacker for Iowa. There's not a lot of times where Jack isn't in the right zone, or he isn't like doesn't have his eyes in the right place when he's dropping into zone. There's not a lot of throws that you see that opponents make against Iowa that's over the middle because typically Jack has dropped into the right like passing lane and he has his eyes on the quarterback and he's doing the right things that you should be doing as a middle linebacker in coverage. And when you look at Luke Kuechly, that's what Luke Kuechly did really well. He was very good at um, diagnosing the passing game and being able to go out there and, um, be disruptive, be able to create turnovers, be able to get interceptions, and be very disruptive in the passing game. Another thing that Jack does really well that is again very similar to Luke Kuechly. Um, when Jack sees a play develop, he can be very quick to attack and be able to get to a running back and to be able to make a tackle for loss, or to be able to even not even maybe if he doesn't make the tackle for loss, to be able to stretch a play out so that others can come and gang tackle and keep a running back from limiting their overall rushing yards in that situation. I will be honest, we'll get to this in the floor. I wish he did it more, but there's still enough flashes there here and there where you're like, okay, it happens. He can see things, he diagnoses them really well. And I think that's again both a benefit and a hindrance to what Jack Campbell is that like in one sense he's really smart. He's very smart, he's very analytical. You can tell that he understands what's supposed to be happening on the field. There's not a lot of tape where again he's out of position. It's more so like teaching Jack to trust what he sees and if to trust the studying and the preparation he's put in so that he can be faster on the field. Um Really quick, shout out to D Williams. He says, "Yo, Miko, I think Gibbs' floor is DeAndre Swift." I think if you get DeAndre Swift, that's an amazing floor. In all honesty, um, I will say there are very similar things that, again, as a runner. So there are, and it's like good and bad. If there were things that you hated about DeAndre Swift as a running back, right? If you didn't love the fact that he didn't always hit the hole consistently, you're gonna have those same complaints about Jahmyr Gibbs because Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't do it consistently. Now, I forgot to say this when talking about Jahmyr Gibbs. Everything that I have a problem with Jahmyr Gibbs in the running game, I have to add the caveat that Alabama's offensive line was terrible last year. Probably the worst offensive line that I've seen Alabama have as far as from a running game standpoint. You do not see a lot of push. So while again, Jahmyr needs to be better in being able to hit holes or to like maybe even be able to stretch plays out or break tackles, there's also a great amount of of critique of criticism. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. There's a great amount of criticism that needs to go to Alabama's offensive line for not creating lanes for him, for not driving guys or getting up to the second level to be able to um, make it easier on Jahmyr to be dynamic um, in the running game. And I think that's even something similar with Jack, where if there's criticism on Jack Campbell's game, if there are issues that you're seeing with Jack Campbell in his game, it's not just the fact that like Jack's not playing well. There are times when his defensive line is not helping him out in a sense of again occupying blocks well. They're allowing guys to just get to the second level, and they're not like it's one thing if you're going to let a guy get to the second level, but you make the tackle for loss. It's another thing when you've let an offensive lineman get to your linebacker and you're nowhere near the play to be able to make a play on the football, whether it's the quarterback or the running back. In those situations, it's kind of a fail as a defense as a whole. And so again, the same thing with Jahmyr Gibbs, where if he's not being as dynamic as I want him to be, in on the offensive side of things, it's not just Jahmyr Gibbs' fault. It also is a critique and a criticism of that offensive line because they're not as dominant as I'm used to seeing Alabama offensive linemen be. Um, Again, we're talking about Alabama being a school that typically churns out, first round tackles, first round guards, or at least guys that are going to get drafted. You watched last year's tape, not a lot of great offensive linemen in Alabama that last year. Not a lot of guys that are really like manhandling guys and making it easy in the run game. Pass game, I can't say, right? I don't think Bryce Young got sacked a whole lot, so maybe they're really solid in the pass game. But running and run blocking, again, I'm used to Alabama doing so much more in the run game. I mean, again, they've churned out so many top tier running backs or so many running backs that get drafted high because of how good that offensive line is. And Jahmyr Gibbs didn't get to benefit from that. Um, but yeah, going back to Jack Campbell, like I said, the things that remind me most about Jack or that I can see between Jack and Luke is coverage ability. So I think that is one thing that we won't have to be concerned about with Jack when it comes down to like if he well, not if, when he's starting day one, he won't be a liability in zone coverage. Now, what they tried to do with him in man, I think that would just be bad coaching, right? If you're going to put Jack Campbell in a man-on-man situation with a running back or an athletic tight end, that's your fault as a defensive coordinator, Aaron Glenn, because that's not his strength, and you have enough DBs to not put Jack Campbell in those situations. You got to figure that out to be able to keep him out of those situations so that he can continue to do what he's best at. Which again, like I said, is to drop in zone, to communicate to the defense, to again, when he sees it, he attacks it. Um, and again, from just like an emotional leadership standpoint, from everything that you've heard, I'm sure everything that you've read about Jack Campbell, the one thing that comes out is character. And I feel like that was something that Luke Kuechly very much had. And I think when you have that, it makes it easier not only for you to hit the ground running from a leadership standpoint. I think Jack is going to improve quicker and more efficiently than maybe some other rookies just because of the type of like approach that he takes to leadership. Um, With that said, like I said, with every ceiling, there has to be a floor. So what is Jack Campbell's floor? You may love this, you may hate this, I don't know. I'm gonna say it's Alex Anzalone plus. Like he's a slightly better at his worst, he's a slightly better version of Alex Anzalone. And it kind of goes back to what I was saying as far as coverage. He'll be much better in coverage than Alex Anzalone ever was. From a zone standpoint and just being able to know where he's supposed to be on the field from a defensive perspective. But the other things that make him Alex Anzalone that are not so good, that again brings this to his floor, is that while I said Jack can be quick to analyze and diagnose plays, there's also a number of times on tape where you'll see that he's very slow to do this. He will see a play happen and you're just waiting for him to fire off the ball, and it's just like it's not like you're sitting there like, okay, fire off now, fire off now, fire off now. And it's like, man, if he had actually, you know, been on time with the snap count, and I don't know what this is. I don't know if it's because it's late in the drive. I don't know if he's tired. I don't know if he's cramping. I don't know what it is, but it looks slow on tape at times where it's like, yo, you got to go out there and you got to fire off when the ball snaps. These guards are going to get there. And like I said earlier, some of this is his defensive line's fault. Like, how are you guys allowing guys to get that close to like get to the second level that easily? How are you guys not being that disruptive to where like, yo, a guard does feel like he has to like kind of like hold you or contend with you for a second so that your linebackers can make plays. Um, but even with that said, again, when Jack does, even when he does fire off, one of his weaknesses is that Jack doesn't use his hands well. He's very much a throw his shoulder, throw his body into guys, and tries to use his size as a way of dislodging offensive linemen. And if anybody is familiar with Alex Anzalone, this was one of Alex Anzalone's biggest issues early with the Saints, and it's one of the reasons he had shoulder issues for the first couple years in the league because he would literally just throw his body into guys, and then he has a shoulder injury, and now you're not available for your team because you have to go out, you have to have shoulder surgery or whatever it may be. And I've never played linebacker. Luke's in the chat. He can probably tell you this better than I can. I'm going to tend to believe that your shoulders are very important as a linebacker position. If you can't hit people, if you can't square up and be able to drive with your legs and to be able to wrap guys because your shoulders messed up, you immediately become a liability to your defense. And so when I was watching Jack's tape and I'm watching it over and over again, it's like, dude, you have hands. Use them. Do not just run up chest up to a guy and think that because you're 6'5", 250, that you're going to dislodge this 6'3", 300-pound offensive lineman. It's probably not going to happen. He's already got like the leverage advantage because he's the low man. And so it doesn't mean that Jack's not going to have a great career, but it's something that I think if Kelvin Shepherd is looking at his tape, it should be the first thing that stands out. Those should be the first two things that stand out about Jack Campbell. Hey, I need you to process what you see because your eyes are in the right place. You need to process that faster. You need to be able to see that and go and trust what you see. And secondly, when you get there and if someone is in your way, you have to attack with your hands and be able to move people out the way. Do not throw your body into it because all the offensive lineman is going to do is throw his body into you and he's going to knock you down, which you will see Jack on the ground quite a bit because an offensive lineman or a tight end has dislodged him from his feet or simply just, again, because Jack's throwing his body, they're allowing him to fall. And then you're not in the play. You're not able to make a play on the running back. You're not able to make a play on the quarterback because you're on the ground. And all you needed to do was keep your feet, use your hands, and you could have had some sort of ability to get to the quarterback or get to the running back. To me, this is correctable because again, like we're talking about again teaching him hand techniques. We're teaching him like, hey, you need to learn how to get off of blocks. You need to learn how to understand leverage and understand where your hands need to be and where your feet need to be and not leave your feet and not just lunge at guys. Like ideally, probably put him in a couple pass rush situations so that he can learn how to properly pass rush and properly how to get around guards. Now, another thing that I think I'm honestly just saying this now that I'm kind of thinking about it. Probably another reason why Jack never developed those skills as a block or as a pass rusher or as a linebacker as far as getting off of blocks. Iowa's offense sucks. All right, it is what it is, and so sometimes guys in college develop bad habits because it's worked. It's worked in practice, maybe it's worked in the Big Ten, and you've never had to learn another way because guess what? Throwing your body into somebody at 6'5", 250 has worked for you enough to where you're like, "Hey, why do I need hand techniques? Because I'm just bigger and stronger than everybody else." Well, these guys are gonna learn very quickly. Aiden learned this lesson a little too late for me, but he learned it eventually. Running down the middle of offensive linemen's chests is going to get you on somebody's highlight reel. It's going to get you pancaked. It's going to have someone lift you off the ground and put their whole weight on you. Like Jack is going to learn that lesson one way or another that like running into people and just throwing your body at them isn't good for your career and it's not going to help your team in any capacity. So Luke says, nope, we got to fight Meko. Campbell's floor can't be Alex. It is. I'm sorry. It is because, and in the same way, like this coaching staff is going to love the same things about Jack that they love about Alex. He's going to be a great leader. He's going to be a great communicator. He's going to be smart and all of those things. And he may not do a couple things well that we want him to do. And this coaching staff is going to re-sign him contract after contract because he's a culture fit, because he's a leader, because they can trust him. Find the adjective. That's the reason that Jack Campbell is going to stay around longer than maybe some people want him to if he doesn't reach that Luke Kuechly type of ceiling. And again, I say there's a ceiling, I say there's a floor for both of these guys. There's also a middle ground. I don't know what the middle ground is. I love that D. Williams, you said DeAndre Swift. I think DeAndre Swift would be a great middle ground for Jahmyr Gibbs. If Jahmyr Gibbs turns out to be DeAndre Swift, people won't love it because of where he was drafted. But if he's at least healthier than DeAndre Swift ever was, no one's going to complain. If Jahmyr Gibbs is available, but he's just as explosive as DeAndre Swift was, and he's just as big of an impact player for this offense, no one will complain because he'll be available. The reason people got kind of sick of DeAndre Swift, he wasn't available. Did he make plays when he was available or when he was slightly healthy? Sure. It just happened too far in between for DeAndre. I think with Jack, I genuinely don't know like what the middle, because I feel like with linebackers, you're either really good or you're trash. Like there's not like great middle ground. Or at least not middle ground that people talk about, right? Those aren't the guys that typically get big contracts. If they're not great. Maybe Leighton Vander Esch. I've seen a couple people say that Leighton Vander Esch could be Jack Campbell's floor. I've seen some people say that Leighton Vander Esch could be Jack Campbell's ceiling. If that's his ceiling, that's a waste of a first round pick. Leighton had a great rookie year from what I remember. I think he had like 100 tackles and was in the like defensive rookie of the year race. But I think they also like cut him like 2 years later and then they just ended up re-signing him. Like, or they at least were looking to trade him. Like Leighton hasn't always been a staple. And I think maybe that's what you probably get out of Jack is that maybe he's not your best linebacker, but maybe he's somebody that you can just count on and depend on. Shout out to Big T. Anzalone might shock you all this season, but I do think Jack and Rodrigo should start, in my opinion. Yeah, this is where I'm gonna disagree with you on the Rodrigo part. And this was something that like Luke will probably appreciate this more than some people. I like the mentality that Malcolm Rodriguez has, and I like the effort that he plays with. What I struggle with is that football is still like size and strength and speed still matter. And unfortunately for Malcolm, there are too many situations where his height kind of worked against him. He's not fast enough, he's not elusive enough to beat guards and to be disruptive in the run game. So like if you got bodies on Malcolm, like you got body on Malcolm, like yeah, he's eventually going to hip toss you, but like that's only after he's gotten tired of it. He can be easily blocked, he can be easily moved. And then what makes it worse is that height and that lack of like top tier athleticism also shows up in the pass game. So he's not a great, like it would be different if he was like very agile and quick footed to where like he could be excellent in man coverage, but he's not good in man coverage. He's not good in zone coverage very well either. So what Malcolm is somebody that, again, depending on the lineup, depending on certain situations, yeah, he can probably be effective in the run game. He may be a really good blitzer from the inside. Um, because again, that's something that Jack just kind of needs to like figure out. He's not great at it. But again, he's gonna have to kind of beat out he's gonna have to beat out Derek Barnes for that because Derek Barnes, out of the linebackers they have, Derek Barnes is the best blitzer that they have at the linebacker position. The problem is they keep trying to make him play linebacker. That's the biggest issue with Derek Barnes. He needs to be playing edge. He needs to be kind of in that James Houston role where he gets to rush the passer. Man, that one really tripped me up. Gets to rush the passer from the edge, and not be put in so many situations where he can be a liability at linebacker because Derek Barnes just isn't a very good linebacker, um, at least the last 2 seasons. If Derek Barnes comes back this year and he finally put it all together, then I'll be extremely happy. And then I think that's a situation where you probably see Jack and Derek Barnes next to each other more so than you would see Jack and Rodrigo next to each other. And yeah, I mean, like I said, Luke probably would agree with me more. Emrod is not a starting linebacker in this league, and I don't think he is either. I think again he facilitated a need for this defense last year. Um, Again, being a hard-nosed guy, being a guy that went out there and competed and really exposed your linebacker room, right? The Lions try to get away, or Brad Holmes tried to get away with signing a couple guys that weren't, you know, that weren't anybody really. They weren't starting linebackers, they weren't high quality linebackers for the teams that they were coming from. But we tried to get this idea that, like, okay, well, Kelvin Shepherd will develop somebody or they can find a diamond in the rough. And when you have a 6th-round rookie come in and beat those guys out, it quickly exposes how weak that room is. Um, Big C, no, I don't think our linebacker room is completed. I do think they still could add somebody, right? I think with if again, we kind of talked about it a little bit earlier with the whole idea, like if Jared Goff goes down, do you feel great about Nate Sudfeld starting 3, 4, 5 games? Probably not. I think in the same way, like if Alex goes down and you're stuck with Jack and Malcolm, I don't think you're gonna feel great about that because Malcolm's gonna be a liability. I don't know. I have high hopes for Jack Campbell, but I do think that Malcolm's going to be a liability in either definitely in the pass game. He's a liability in the pass game. He has his moments in the run game where he can, like, again, fills lanes, makes tackles for loss, but just what do you do with him when if they decide to go play action, or if they decide to go, the defense decides to play man or something of that nature, and Malcolm has to line up against a tight end, or he has to line up against a running back. He doesn't have the athleticism to really contend um, with athletes at those positions. So, like I said, those are kind of, like I said, my floor, my ceilings for the Lions first round picks. Um, like I said earlier in the show, like you guys kind of know, this is my first stream on this channel. I'm looking to do these every other day. So I'll have a stream up on Wednesday. We'll come back on here. We'll talk some more Lions. I'll do a rookie comparison this Wednesday, looking at the next 2 picks that the Lions made. So looking at Sam Laporta and Brian Branch, who I think they kind of remind me of and who I think their ceilings and their floors can be. Also, I know next week Lions rookie mini camp starts up, so we'll go ahead and we'll preview that. Um, and then I saw that news broke today. Lions, or the NFL, will be dropping the schedule this Thursday, so we'll have like a special, like short emergency stream probably on Thursday just to kind of go through the schedule, kind of get some super early season predictions because obviously we don't even know what the 52 is going to look like, but we'll get together, talk about that, see what we all think the Lions will be this year. But yeah, guys, I appreciate everybody for stopping by. Luke, appreciate you, man. Um, Big T, D Williams, um, John Kapler, appreciate you coming by, man. Just everybody for taking out the time. BD Buster, Detroit D. You guys made my first stream a huge success, made it a lot of fun. I appreciate the feedback. And hopefully I will be able to see you guys on Wednesday when we do this again. It'll be like I said, every Monday, every Wednesday, 6 p.m. I'll be on here and I'll be chopping it up with you guys. So Again, appreciate you guys, and I will see y'all on the next one.